The drizzle drifting over Cascadia that evening felt more like a sigh than a storm, a soft shimmer of water turning every sidewalk into a glowing ribbon of reflected light. In her modest apartment on the third floor, Mara Delaney wiped the last bit of water from the kitchen counter. She moved slowly, not from age, she was only 39, but from the exhaustion that came from long shifts at the medical center and the unspoken weight she carried in her chest. The quiet patter of the rain had always comforted her, but tonight it felt unusually gentle, as if the sky itself was trying not to disturb her. She had barely finished when the door creaked open. Her 12-year-old son, Rowan, stepped inside with a grin too wide for his face and a stack of old DVDs balanced in his hands. "Mom," he said, breathless with excitement, "can we have a movie night? Just you and me?" Mara blinked, surprised. It had been ages since they'd watched anything together. Work schedules, homework, routines, life. It all seemed to conspire against moments like these. Yet here he was, hopeful and bright and waiting. How could I possibly say no to that? She murmured, smiling despite the fatigue tugging behind her eyes. "Pick something good." Rowan marched to the table and fanned the DVDs out like a dealer showing his hand. "I picked one you used to love," he said proudly. "The one you and Dad always made fun of?" Her smile faded for only half a heartbeat, but that was enough for her heart to pinch. It had been 4 years since Liam, her husband Rowan's father, died in a sudden collision on a late winter morning. 4 years, and still every mention of him tugged at her like a soft but persistent thread. Time hadn't erased the pain. It had simply made it quieter, something she carried rather than something that crushed her. "Good choice," she said softly. Keeping her tone light even though her chest ached with memory, they settled onto the left seat, wrapped together in a blanket that had survived countless movie nights long before life had rearranged itself. The living room glowed with the warm amber of a single lamp, casting soft shadows across the walls. Rowan hit play. A romantic old-school classic flickered onto the screen, the kind with overly dramatic music and actors who delivered lines as if performing for a theater audience. Rowan snickered. People actually talked like this? Mara laughed, remembering how Liam would imitate the actors, puff his chest out, and declare ridiculous lines in ridiculous voices just to make her crack up. For a moment, the memory felt warm instead of sharp. The rain deepened outside, steady and rhythmic. Like an old friend tapping the window, peaceful, almost like the life they once had, and yet, somewhere beneath the comfort, a familiar heaviness stirred. She had become good at floating through her days working, cleaning, caring, moving, as if she were checking boxes on an endless list. She convinced everyone, including herself sometimes, that she was fine. But fine wasn't joy. Fine wasn't aliveness. Fine was just survival dot as the movie played. Something inside her, something she had pressed down for years, shifted slightly. The way soil moves before a sprout breaks through. Rowan kept munching popcorn, occasionally glancing up at her with a thoughtful little crease in his brow. He had always been observant, more so than most children. And tonight, under the soft glow of the lamp, he seemed to notice something about her mood. "Mom?" he whispered during a quiet moment in the film. She hummed in response. "Do you ever feel lonely?" The question cut through the room like a feather that somehow struck with the force of a stone. She froze. "Lonely?" she repeated softly, turning toward him as if the right answer might show itself in his expression. Rowan wasn't teasing, wasn't curious for curiosity's sake. His brown eyes were solemn, almost too grown for his young face. He was asking because he cared. "I see you sometimes," he said, staring at his blanket. "When you think I'm busy, you stare out the window like you're waiting for someone. Or remembering something." Mara inhaled sharply. He had noticed all the nights she lingered at the kitchen window long after dishes were done. All the time she smiled too quickly to hide the ache behind her ribs. All the quiet moments when she wished she had someone, anyone, to ask her how she was doing and really mean it. I miss him too, Rowan whispered, but I don't want you to be sad forever. Her heart cracked and warmed at the same time that she wanted to say she wasn't sad. She wanted to reassure him the way mothers are supposed to reassure their children. But something in his gaze, something open and earnest, made her realize he didn't need comforting. He needed honesty. You're right, she said finally, her voice barely above the soft hum of the rain. Sometimes I do get lonely, and I miss your dad every single day. He looked up at her then, eyes shimmering with relief, as if hearing her say it meant he wasn't alone and missing him either. But, she added, brushing her thumb gently over his cheek, you bring me more joy than you know. Rowan smiled, but there was another thought behind it when he clearly wasn't finished sharing. I just want you to be happy, he said. Like, really happy? Like you used to be? She opened her mouth but found no words. Tears stung her eyes, blurring the movie into streaks of color. I'd be okay, he added softly, if you ever felt that way again. Even if it means having someone else to talk to. Someone who makes you laugh. Her breath trembled. Those small words, spoken so innocently, reached deeper than anything had in years. He wasn't giving her permission to move on. He was giving her space to live again. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly as if he had just handed her a key she didn't know she still needed. Thank you, she whispered into his hair. That means everything. He hugged her back, warm and solid and full of a love far too big for his age. So, can we finish the movie now? He mumbled, embarrassed by his own boldness. She laughed through her tears. Yes, we can. He leaned against her shoulder, and minutes later he drifted into sleep, his breathing soft and steady. Mara didn't move. The film washed over them, old-fashioned music and all. While the storm outside faded to a gentle murmur, she watched the characters dance in the rain on screen and thought about Liam, about the life they built, brief but full of meaning. She no longer felt the stabbing pain of loss, but rather something quieter, gratitude, a soft warmth for the love they once shared. Maybe love didn't end. Maybe it changed shape, the way rain becomes mist and mist becomes clouds. The movie ended. The credits rolled. The apartment was still except for the soft rhythm of Rowan's breathing. She brushed a curl from his forehead and whispered, "You're my whole world, little one." And for the first time in years, the question he had asked, "Do you ever feel lonely?" didn't feel like a wound dot. It felt like the beginning of a new answer. She stayed on the couch long after the screen went dark, listening to the soft hush of the rain and the quieter hum of her own thoughts. The question kept floating back to her. Do you ever feel lonely? It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a complaint. It was a truth spoken aloud by someone who loved her enough to see what she tried to hide, eventually. She carried Rowan to his room, his arms dangling sleepily at her sides, his head pressed against her shoulder. He was heavier than she remembered, all long limbs and growing boy, but she held him as if he were still small enough to fit in the crook of her arm. She laid him down gently, tucked the blanket around him, then brushed her hand over his hair. "You see more than you should," she whispered. "And somehow that makes me braver." He murmured something unintelligible in his sleep, then settled again, a faint smile on his lips. She watched him for a long moment, then turned off the light and moved back down the hall dot in the living room. The lamp still glowed, casting a circle of warmth around the worn coffee table and the rumpled blanket on the couch. She stood by the window, arms folded loosely over her chest, and looked out at the city. Raindrops threaded down the glass, distorting the lights into soft streaks of gold and red. For years, the rain had sounded like absence, like everything she had lost. Tonight, for reasons she couldn't quite name. It sounded different, gentler, almost like encouragement. Maybe it was because someone had finally said out loud what she had been too afraid to admit. She was lonely. She missed Liam, and she didn't know what to do with that emptiness anymore. She thought of the times she imagined him standing in the kitchen doorway, leaning against the frame in his old flannel shirt, teasing her about her taste in tea or the way she always hummed the same melody when she cooked. She thought of their movie nights, like the one she'd just had with Rowan, except back then the couch felt fuller, the apartment louder, her laughter easier. Am I allowed to want more? She whispered to the glass, as if the rain might answer. Only reply was the soft patter against the pane, and the distant sound of a bus rolling. Through the intersection below Dot, she stayed there, until the rain softened to a drizzle and her muscles began to ache from standing. Finally, she turned off the lamp and went to bed, the ghost of Rowan's words curling up beside her in the dark. If you ever wanted to smile again, I'd be okay with that. Dot morning arrived with the sky washed pale and clear, as if the storm had rinsed the world overnight. Sunlight edged through the blinds, thin but hopeful. Mara woke before her alarm, which almost never happened. For a moment she lay there, staring at the ceiling, feeling strangely lighter. Not fixed, not healed, but as if someone had opened a window in a stuffy room. She slipped out of bed, tied her hair back, and padded to the kitchen. The quiet felt different today, not empty, but waiting. On impulse, she pulled out the ingredients for pancakes, something she hadn't made in a long time. It was a breakfast she used to save for special occasions, for Sundays with Liam reading the paper and Rowan crawling into his lap. She hadn't quite realized how long she had avoided it. Dot as she stirred the batter. She caught herself humming under her breath. A tune she didn't even remember learning, something bright and simple. The sound startled her. It felt like hearing someone else in the room. Dot by the time Rowan shuffled in. Hair rumpled from sleep and socks mismatched. The kitchen smelled like vanilla and butter. Morning, he mumbled, rubbing his eyes. Morning. Sleepyhead, she replied, flipping a pancake. We're having a feast. He blinked at the skillet, then at her. You only make pancakes when you're in a really good mood? She smiled, half amused, half thrown by how quickly he noticed things. Maybe I'm in a decent mood today. He slid into his chair, studying her with that quiet, searching gaze. For a while, they ate without saying much, the clink of forks and the distant murmur of the city filling the room. Then, between bites, he asked the question she should have seen coming. So, does this mean you're going to go out more? Talk to people and stuff? She nearly dropped her fork. That's very direct, she said, chuckling softly. He shrugged. You tell me all the time I should make friends and be more social. Maybe you should try it too. She tilted her head, impressed and mildly horrified. Since when did you become my life coach? He grinned. Since forever. She laughed again, but behind it, her mind began to shift gears. She thought of how small her world had become. Work, home, grocery store, the occasional school meeting. She had colleagues she liked, neighbors she waved to, but no one she really opened up to. No one who knew the way Liam used to overseason everything, or how she hated folding fitted sheets, or that she still slept on her side of the bed, even though no one occupied the other. Maybe, she said at last. One step at a time. Rowan smiled, satisfied with that answer, and moved on to drenching his pancakes in syrup later, when the day wore itself out and the apartment grew quiet again. Mara returned to her usual spot by the window. But this time, when she stared at the city, the loneliness felt different. Not less, but not as heavy. As if it were a place she was standing in temporarily rather than a home she'd been condemned to. She breathed in, breathed out. Then, very softly, she whispered to the empty room, I'm trying, Liam. I really am. She didn't expect an answer. She didn't get one, but there was a kind of peace in saying it out loud, as if forming the words with her lips made the effort real. Days turned into a rhythm again, but not quite the same rhythm as before. She still worked long shifts at the medical center, still came home tired and sore, still ran through the familiar checklist of dinner, dishes, homework, laundry. But somewhere in the background, Rowan's question kept playing like a quiet song. Do you ever feel lonely? And beneath it, his offer, I'd be okay if you wanted to smile again. 2 weeks later, as she sorted through the mail on the kitchen counter, she found a small, glossy flyer tucked among bills and coupons. It was an invitation from the neighborhood association, a casual evening gathering at the community hall 2 blocks over. Coffee, snacks, conversation, a chance to connect with neighbors. The flyer promised in cheerful fonts. Her first instinct was to set it aside. These events weren't new. She had seen invitations like this before and always found reasons to skip them. Too tired, too busy, not in the mood. It was easy to let the days blur past when you never stepped outside your established path. She left the flyer on the counter and went to start dinner. Rowan came in shortly after, dropping his backpack by the door and heading straight for the smell in the kitchen. What's this? He asked, snagging a piece of cucumber from the cutting board as his eyes landed on the flyer. Neighborhood thing, she said. Some meet and greet at the hall on Saturday. He picked it up and read it carefully, then looked at her with a slow, knowing smile. You should go. She snorted softly. You're very invested in my social life lately. Well, yeah, he replied. You keep telling me that having people is important. And also, he added with a shrug, you don't really hang out with anyone outside of work. That's not entirely true, she protested. I talk to people. Talking to the cashier about coupons doesn't count, he said, grinning. She tried to glare at him, but the corners of her mouth betrayed her. I don't know, she said after a moment. These things can be awkward, and I'd probably just stand in a corner pretending to look at the snack table. He tilted his head, considering. I think you should go anyway. Try it once. If you hate it, you never have to go again. You're getting really good at using my own advice against me, she murmured. He grinned, unabashed. Someone has to. That night, she left the flyer on the fridge instead of throwing it away. She told herself she would decide later, but every time she walked past, the bright lettering seemed to tug at her. On Saturday, she stood in front of her bedroom mirror longer than usual. She had chosen a soft green sweater that made her eyes look a touch brighter and a pair of jeans that were comfortable but flattering. It wasn't a fancy outfit, but it was more intentional than the scrubs and worn t-shirts she usually wore outside of work. She stared at her reflection, unsure of how she felt. Nervous, a little. Self-conscious, yes. But mostly curious about who she might see, about how it might feel to be somewhere that wasn't work or home. Wow, Rowan said from the doorway, leaning against the frame. You look different, in a good way. Is that your professional opinion? She asked, arching an eyebrow. He grinned. Definitely. You look like someone who might actually say hi to other humans. She pressed a hand to her chest, feigning offense. You wound me. He stepped into the room and gave her a quick hug. You'll do great. She held on to that small confidence as she walked the 2 blocks to the community hall. The air outside was cool and crisp. The sidewalks were still darkened from a recent drizzle, but the rain had stopped. Streetlights shimmered on puddles, and the sky was a deep velvet blue. Inside, warm light spilled from the open doors. Laughter and conversation drifted out to meet her. She hesitated on the threshold for a second, then took a breath and stepped in. The space was modest but welcoming, folding chairs set up in small circles. Tables lined with cookies and coffee, a bulletin board displaying flyers about volunteer opportunities and local news. People milled about, talking in clusters. Some faces she recognized from the building, others from brief nods on the street. A woman from downstairs waved. "Mara, you made it." "Hi, Lila," she replied, easing into a smile. "Yeah, figured I'd stop in for a bit." Lila launched into a story about her garden, and Mara listened, gradually letting the tension loosen in her shoulders. She moved from one small group to another, exchanging polite conversation. It wasn't thrilling, but it wasn't terrible. It felt manageable. She was pouring herself a second cup of coffee when she heard someone say her name from behind her. "Mara Delaney?" The voice was warm, a little surprised, and oddly familiar. She turned, cup in hand. The world seemed to tilt just slightly. Standing a few feet away was a man she hadn't seen in almost 10 years. Dark hair, now lightly threaded with gray, a few lines around his eyes, but the same calm, gentle expression she remembered. "Ethan Cole?" she asked, then laughed at herself. "No, that's not right. You're Adrian. Adrian Cole." He smiled, and the recognition clicked fully into place. Adrian had been Liam's college roommate, part of the raucous stories and late-night adventures she'd heard about. So many times she almost felt she'd lived them herself. He had attended their wedding, visited once or twice during the early years of their marriage, and then life had pulled them in different directions. She hadn't seen him since before Rowan was born. "It's really you," Adrian said, stepping closer. "Wow, it's been a long time." "About a lifetime," she replied, her heart somewhere up in her throat. "What are you doing here?" "I just moved back to the city," he said. "Needed a fresh start. I saw your name on the building directory a couple of weeks ago and wondered if it was actually you. And now here you are." They laughed, the sound a little disbelieving, a little stunned. It should have been awkward. Years had passed. Their last real conversation was a memory buried under so much else. Yet, as they started talking, the distance between then and now seemed to shrink. He told her he'd been teaching literature at a high school out of state, that he'd gone through a painful divorce the year before and decided to return to familiar streets and old haunts. She told him about her work at the medical center, about raising Rowan, about how busy and quiet life had become all at once. They spoke of Liam too, not in hushed tones soaked with grief, but with a gentle fondness. They swapped small, forgotten stories, Liam refusing to study until someone bribed him with pizza, his ridiculous dance moves at their wedding, the way he'd insist every dog they passed liked him best. "That sounds exactly like him," Adrian said, shaking his head with a grin. "He always did assume every dog, cat, and human adored him." "He wasn't wrong," Mara replied softly. The more they talked, the easier it became. Conversation flowed around old memories, wound through their separate lives, circled back to the present with surprising ease. There was no pressure, no strange expectations. Just the quiet comfort of two people who shared a piece of history and had both been scraped raw by life in different ways. When the gathering began to wind down, Adrian offered to walk her out. "It's really good to see you," he said as they stepped into the cool evening air. "You look strong." "Some days," she answered honestly. "Other days I'm just really good at pretending." "Then I'm impressed either way," he said with a half smile. They reached the corner where their paths would split. She tucked her hands into her pockets, suddenly aware of the quiet between them. "Maybe we could catch up properly sometime," Adrian suggested. "Coffee, or something that resembles coffee?" She hesitated for only a second. Then she thought of Rowan's question, of the pancake morning, of the flyer on the fridge, and her decision to finally show up. "I'd like that," she said. They exchanged numbers. She walked home with a strange lightness in her chest. Not romantic, not yet, but undeniably warm. Like remembering how to breathe after realizing you'd been holding your breath for far too long. When she stepped into the apartment, Rowan was sitting cross-legged on the couch, tablet in his lap. He looked up the moment the door clicked. So, he asked, trying to sound casual and failing. How was it? It was nice, she said, hanging her coat on the hook. Actually nice. He narrowed his eyes playfully. Did you talk to people? Several people, in fact, she replied. And I ran into an old friend of your dad's, Adrian Cole. You wouldn't remember him. You weren't born yet? Rowan's eyebrows shot up. Dad's friend? For real? For real, she said. He just moved back to the city. Rowan tried to hide the unmistakable sparkle in his eyes. So, did you talk a lot? She snorted. Why do you sound like you're about to take notes for a report? Just curious, he said, grin tugging at his mouth. You look different, happier. She tried to brush it off, but the truth slipped through anyway. It was good to remember parts of your dad with someone who knew him back then, she admitted. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. Good, Rowan said simply. I like that. Over the next few weeks, text messages began to appear on her phone from a name she now saw almost daily, Adrian. Sometimes it was just a photo of a particularly dramatic sunset over the city. Caption was something like, sky showing off again. Other times, it was a quick joke about his students' essays or recommendation for a book he thought she might like. She found herself smiling at her screen in hallways and break rooms, in grocery store aisles and quiet moments on the bus. It wasn't intrusive, wasn't too much. It was just company, a reminder that someone somewhere was thinking of her during their day. They started meeting for coffee every now and then. It never felt like a formal appointment, more like two people slipping into a rhythm that had been waiting for them all along. They talked about everything and nothing, the chaos of their jobs, their favorite childhood movies, how the city had changed over the years. On a rainy Sunday afternoon, Adrian called and said, Want to take a walk? I know it's damp, but the air feels different after it rains. She almost said no. Rain used to be the backdrop to her grief, the sound that marked so many long, lonely nights. But something in his voice, light, hopeful, easy, made her say yes instead. They met at the path circling Lake Alder, a calm body of water hugged by trees and walking trails. The rain had softened to a mist that dusted the surface of the lake like breath on glass. They walked slowly, umbrellas tilted, shoes squishing occasionally on the damp path. Adrian told her more about his divorce, not in dramatic detail, but with an honesty that made her chest ache with recognition. Not all losses happened in a single shattering moment. Some stretched out over months, years, a slow unspooling of something that once felt solid. I felt like the floor kept disappearing under me, he said quietly. Over and over. But here I am, still standing. I guess that's something. It's a lot, she replied, the words slipping out before she could filter them. It's more than some people manage. He looked at her, a small, grateful smile in his eyes. They stopped at a railing overlooking the lake. Ducks floated lazily on the water, leaving faint trails behind them. The city skyline rose in the distance, softened by the mist. Liam used to say you were the best thing that ever happened to him, Adrian said after a moment. She blinked, taken off guard. He said that? More than once, Adrian replied. Usually when he was trying to convince me I needed to grow up and find someone like Mara, or I'd turn into a grumpy old professor. His words. Not mine. She laughed, then swallowed the lump forming in her throat. He was the best thing that ever happened to me, she said softly. Adrian's voice gentled. He'd be proud of you, you know. You're still here. Still taking care of Rowan. Still getting up every morning. That takes more strength than most people realize. No one had ever said it that way to her. People had offered sympathy, sad looks, soft condolences, but rarely had anyone acknowledged what it meant to keep going, to keep loving her child while carrying her own brokenness. For a moment, she didn't trust herself to speak. The mist on her cheeks wasn't just from the air anymore. She nodded, grateful and shaken in equal measure. "Thank you," she said finally. "I needed to hear that." From then on, their connection grew not in leaps, but in steady, almost unremarkable steps. A shared joke at the cafe, a walk through a weekend farmer's market where Rowan tagged along, sampling every free piece of fruit he could find, a volunteer event at the medical center, where Adrian helped organize a book drive for patients and families. Rowan warmed to him quickly. Adrian had a way of speaking to him that didn't feel patronizing, treating him like someone whose thoughts mattered. He asked about Rowan's favorite video games, listened to his rambling explanations about science experiments, and even took his movie recommendations seriously. One evening, Adrian stopped by their place to drop off a tin of cookies his sister had mailed him. Rowan was curled up on the couch with a blanket and a superhero movie playing quietly. "You can stay if you want," Rowan said, already shifting over to make room. "We're just watching one of Mom's old favorites." Adrian glanced at Mara. "Only if your mom's okay with it." She hesitated for half a heartbeat, then nodded. "Sure, come in." He set the tin on the coffee table and slipped off his shoes. They ended up watching the movie together, the same romantic old film that had played the night Rowan asked his impossible question weeks before. It felt fitting somehow, as if that story on the screen had become a thread through their own. This time, the laughter in the room was louder. The comments were funnier. The silences felt comfortable instead of tensed out at one point. Mara realized she was relaxed, really relaxed, in a way she hadn't been in a long time. No pretending. No forced smiles. Just a quiet, simple enjoyment of the moment. "I almost forgot what this felt like," she murmured during a lull in the film. "What?" Adrian asked softly. "Enjoying something small," she said. "Without guilt. Without wondering if I'm allowed to be happy." He didn't say anything right away. Instead, he looked at the screen, then at her, his expression steady. "Sometimes the small things are the bravest," he said eventually. "Anyone can chase big changes. It's harder to sit on a couch and let yourself laugh again." She held his gaze for a moment, then smiled, touched in a place she had almost numbed on purpose. When the movie ended, Rowan was half asleep, his head lolling to one side. Adrian said goodnight and slipped out quietly, leaving behind the faint scent of coffee and rain on his jacket. "Was that Adrian?" Rowan mumbled as Mara gently nudged him awake to send him to his room. "Yes," she said, helping him stand. "He just left?" "He's nice," Rowan said, words slurring with sleep. "You laugh more when he's here," her heart stuttered. "Do I?" she asked softly. He nodded, eyes already closing again. "Yeah, I like it." Later, as she lay in bed, staring at the faint shadows on the ceiling, she replayed those words. "You laugh more when he's here." Life, she realized, was slowly shifting. Not in dramatic, world-tilting ways, but in small, almost unnoticeable increments. A message, a walk, a shared movie, a child's observation spoken without agenda. Hope, she thought, didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it came in on quiet feet and sat patiently in the corner until you were ready to see it. Weeks turned to months. The rain that had once been constant gave way to longer days and clearer skies. Trees along the streets put out new leaves. The city seemed to breathe differently. Adrian became a regular presence in their lives, though never an intrusive one. Some evenings he joined them for dinner, offering to bring dessert or takeout. Other times he helped Rowan with a school project, explaining how to build a model bridge that wouldn't collapse under too much weight. He fixed the flickering porch light one afternoon, shrugging off Murat's thanks with a simple, "It's nothing." I like doing this stuff. There was no rushing, no declarations. Just kindness, steadiness, a gentle layering of memories over the old ones. One night, as summer edged close and the air stayed warm even after the sun went down, Rowan came into the kitchen while Mara was rinsing dishes. "Mom," he said, leaning against the counter, "can we have another movie night? The kind we had before. With that same movie." She glanced over her shoulder. "Again? You're not tired of it?" "That's kind of our thing now," he said with a shrug.